Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, July the 22nd, and we are starting one more live stream. And if you're here with us, just as usual, you have a priority to suggest topics of your interest. You don't necessarily need to have a question, you can have comments as well, and you can also suggest topics such as culture, a life in Brazil, cities, and so on. So let's get started. And if you're here with us, please also ping me in the chat window so I know the streaming is going well. We have faced some issues with our streaming recently. We did replace our streaming software to be able to broadcast to different social media. But now we are second guessing our choice because of so many problems we have had. Yes, we have Marisa Navas. Seja bem-vinda, Marisa. Muito bom tê-los por aqui. Agradeço a participação. Aaron, the stream is up. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for letting us know. And let's get started. Let's take a look at the news. Let's see what's going on in Brazil. And we're going to take a look at Estadão. Estadão is a major Brazilian newspaper, and this main headline talks about the tariffs from the United States. Tariffs, they went back in effect. It looks like there was some type of attempt to negotiate commercial topics between Brazil and the U.S., and it looks like there was no agreement, so now the U.S. is applying tariffs, if I'm not mistaken, tariffs of 25%. This is the main headline over here, and here this reporter is saying, you know, the extra tariffs from the United States have started. Our strategy, not yet. Meaning that Brazil did have time, you know, to prepare or to have some type of approach, but nothing was done, like from this reporter's perspective. There is also this take here, and this piece here says President Lula reacts to the tariffs in three different fronts to profit politically. And the idea here is that current President Lula is trying to galvanize Brazilians, saying that the tariffs are an aggression towards the country, and therefore he should be supported because he's the one who's going to play hardball with the United States. Of course, there are people in favor of such posture, but typically the business people in Brazil would not naturally want to, you know, enter into a fight with the United States. So business people in general, through different associations in Brazil, they are trying to convince the government to negotiate with the United States and avoid more aggravation, if you will. There is also this interesting headline here. This is about President Milei. That's Argentina's president. And here the bottom line is that Argentina is buying more goods from China and the United States instead of Brazil. And there are like substantial changes in the Argentinian economy that are leading those types of changes. There is also something I found it very interesting. There is this is like an editorial, okay? This main picture over here, that's about President Nicolas Maduro, who's like, you know, imprisoned in the United States, in New York, if I'm not mistaken. And here, the newspaper, they took the time to write an editorial saying that there may be a type of you know, like treaty from long ago that could be the basis for the release of President Nicolas Maduro. I don't understand exactly the purpose of the editorial. like I think none of the Brazilian newspapers would support President Nicolas Maduro. So, but it's interesting, right? Like, I mean, how such a foreign subject could become the object of an editorial of a major newspaper in Brazil. Maybe the connection here is that if this could happen to Maduro, maybe it could happen to a Brazilian president. But that's what we see today on the news. Let's take a moment to share about Remax Nomad States. They work with us on several transactions, several real transactions across Brazil. They are based in Rio de Janeiro, neighborhood of Leblon, but they are active throughout Brazil. If you are interested in getting maybe a short list of properties, you can take a screenshot and get in touch with them for the next steps. All right, let's go back to our live stream and see if we have any participation so far. In the chat window, we have a Tuna 4K. Tuna 4K is asking, does minor criminal offenses affect ability to move to Brazil? Tuna 4K, typically not. And even if you have something that is typically not just a minor criminal offense, as long as this thing is long in the past, chances are you could still secure an immigration pathway to Brazil. Now, there are many nuances, right? There are many nuances, and it's difficult to give you an answer that's going to address every type of situation. And in terms of nuance, what I can tell you is, like, even if you have something minor that is related to either sex crimes or crimes committed against minors, typically those things are going to be seen as a bar against immigration to Brazil. This is a topic sometimes we see here at the firm. People who are registered in sexual offender lists, many times they cannot even travel to Brazil, right? So up to 2025, there was no visa requirement for U.S. citizens under prior President Bolsonaro. So, U.S. citizens could basically buy a ticket and fly into Brazil. And for people who would have their names into a sexual offender type of registry, Brazil has a treaty with the United States and other countries in which Brazil has access to those registries. And to the surprise of many people, they would arrive in Brazil and would be denied entry at the border, right? At the border. Sometimes Brazil could even get a notice through the passenger manifest, meaning once the person is about to board in the United States, Brazil would receive a heads up about, incoming U.S. citizens. And guess what? Brazil would many times run those names against the list. And even if time would allow, to call the airline and say, listen, don't let this passenger board, because if you bring this person here, guess what? You're going to need to take them back because we're not going to let them enter the country. Now, like for instance, like for a marijuana possession, for things that occurred when someone was a minor, or like a more extreme case, I don't know, like battery, right? Like even at a felony level, if not committed, like as meant to rob someone, or like for something more serious. Sometimes even felonies, they could be kind of mitigated, again, as long as this thing has occurred, I don't know, like 20 years ago. And very important, for whatever shows up in your background check, you're going to need to provide an explanation of the case to Brazil. And this is not going to be done just by a cover letter. Typically, you're gonna need to provide the court records explaining how the case was disposed. What do I mean by the case was disposed? I mean, everything that was done and that there was a final conclusion. If there was a penalty, to be paid, that you did pay the penalty, and this thing is now in the past. So as you can see, there is no yes or no answer, no black and white type of situation. But we do have, like in the US, it's very common for someone who has lived like for 56 years to have something in their history. And we typically work with our clients to help them, present those circumstances in the best light possible. Okay, we don't go chase your records at the court. That's a job for your U.S. Attorney, but we help you structure that into your application. All right, Aaron, why do Brazilians refer to criminals as Lula's puppies or Lula childrens? Are they accusing him or playing softball with criminals? Aaron, so that's an interesting question. And President Lula, he was found guilty of corruption charges at every single judicial instance you can possibly think. He was afforded the opportunity to defend himself in several judicial instances, and he was found guilty in every single one. And the only reason why he is outside of prison is because the Brazilian Supreme Court did find a technical reason in those cases to say that President Lula was actually judged in an incorrect type of jurisdiction. Okay, so I think, and of course, President Lula, as of today, has a very strong support from half of the population, and has a very good chance of winning the upcoming presidential elections, right? I think, the other half plus part of people who even support him kind of see him as a person who is somewhat connected to criminal facts, right? Either the corruption charges from his past, or more unfortunately, I would say some level of connection, or if not like a formal connection, a unwarranted tolerance to the criminal rings in Brazil. And this was even actually, published in some media, like back when he won the last election. Like when he won the election, in most prisons, I would say in many prisons, those felons, they would celebrate, they would celebrate the victory of President Lula, right? There are also very well documented instances in which President Lula would, basically say that, minor criminal activity, they are not that serious, right? Like even to the point of someone stealing someone else's cell phone, he would say, well, sometimes a teenager is just trying to get money to buy some beer, believe it or not, right? Like this is not a conspiracy theory. Like this is well documented facts that we see. So as you can tell, President Lula is not exactly, I would say, the most straight person out there. And that's why, yes, many people are going to connect President Lula, to criminals in Brazil, Aaron. But again, President Lula does represent half of the Brazilian population. And, there are so many issues with his administration. But one thing is we should say, he typically will fight for, the most needed segments of the Brazilian population. So just like everything else in life, I guess, people are complex, and there are upsides, or I would say virtues of President Lula, if you will, Aaron. Mustafa, hello Mustafa. First time seeing your live. Hello from Pakistan. You are welcome, Mustafa. Thank you for joining us. Tuna 4K, thanks. Thank you for participating, Tuna. Keep the participation coming. Mustafa, I wanted to hire your service, but your website doesn't open for Pakistan. Mustafa, I'm so glad that you're sharing this over here, and then I can explain to you the challenge we face here at the firm. So whenever we have a client, for instance, from Pakistan, from India, from countries in which it is very difficult for you to secure a visa, we're gonna typically decline the consultation unless this person already has a visa to enter Brazil, even a tourist visa. Because, let me explain, Mustafa, if you have a visitor visa and you can enter Brazil, then once you are in Brazil, we can pretty much help you with any type of residency available. Once you enter Brazil, Brazil is going to see you a citizen from Pakistan just like a citizen from the United States. All right, so if you enter Brazil, thumbs up, we can help you with pretty much anything that we can help an American citizen, an European citizen with. Now, the challenge to us, Mustafa, is that if you are in Pakistan and you don't have a visa, it's very difficult for us to help you get a visa. There is an unwritten policy at the Brazilian consulates of many countries. It's unwritten, like it's never said. And if you ask, the consul, if you ask the Brazilian government, they're gonna say, well, this lawyer, he's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But we are talking about experience we have and many people who get in touch with our firm. And the reality is very difficult for you to secure a visitor visa if you live in Pakistan, if you live in India, if you live in African countries, if you live in Egypt, like many countries. So instead of taking your money without being able to really help you, what we do, Mustafa, is that we prefer to cancel your consultation and refund you in full. And when we do so, Mustafa, we are very specific that we are doing so to avoid this type of situation in which we are taking your money and we are unable to assist you with the journey. All right. Now, this said, we do have some, very specific tracks for people who are from those, like countries, and they really want to migrate to Brazil. One track we can help you with is like the real estate investor visa. Because for the real estate investor visa, you can basically buy a property remotely. Once you buy the property remotely, we can apply for your visa within Brazil without you ever coming to Brazil. Once we get the pre-approval, we send this package to the Brazilian embassy in charge of your jurisdiction, and then you're gonna attend an interview in your country at the Brazilian consulate or Brazilian embassy, right? So this is like an exception, but to be honest with you, the vast majority of people, right, like from Iran, Pakistan, India, Nigeria, Sudan, they're gonna say, well, you know what, like I wanna travel to Brazil, can you help me get a visa? We cannot help you get a regular visa. All right, Mustafa, let me know, does it make sense? What do you think about our approach? All right, and here I see your follow-up question. If Brazil embassy in Pakistan doesn't have a nomad visa option, will they still process the visa? You see, I have no idea. I have zero clue because we don't have an experience with the Brazilian embassy in Pakistan. And each and every consulate and embassy, they have a discretion in terms of what to offer and what to process. Now, I said I don't have an idea. I would say I don't have an answer for you. But my suspicion is that if they are not offering on their website, guess what? It's not going to be available in Pakistan. And that's the whole point of what I was telling you. Matt Gaines, hey Matt, so good to see you over here. I hope you and Adrian are doing just fine. Matt, oi Dr. Oliveira, thank you for putting us in contact with Roberto with One Moving. We have a meeting with him next week. Thank you for sharing, Matt, and let me know how the meeting goes. Like I said, Roberto from One Moving, like he is very involved into the immigration scene. And I would expect him to provide a good service to you, but let me know how it goes. Let me know if the services that they offer make sense or not. Mustafa, so you don't recommend applying Brazil nomad visa from Pakistan? I should try to get simple visa. It's a pretty considered approach. I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Mustafa. Yes, I'm very happy to hear that because like we wanna be able to help as many people as we can. I wish the Brazilian embassies and consulates would not have this unwritten policy of making it so hard for people like you to come to Brazil, but that's just a reality, right? And in terms of, let's assume, right? Let's address your question for a second. Let's assume that, and I'm going to try to make it more general, so it's going to be helpful not only to your case but to other cases as well. And we cannot actually answer very specific questions. We can discuss things more generally, right? So that's what I'm going to do over here. If I am in a country and considering if I should get a visa to Brazil, if it's going to be a tourist visa or a digital nomad, the first thing to consider is whether both tracks are available. Okay, so that's going to be your first step. The second step is to match the visa to your intent. Okay, that's something that's overlooked by many immigrants, and that's one of the main reasons that's going to trigger a refusal, right? And something very common, like someone applies for a digital nomad, and guess what? They say, listen, I'm applying for the digital nomad because I want to live in Brazil, right? Like as soon as you say so, your application is doomed. Your application is doomed, particularly if you are in one of those more challenging countries from an immigration perspective. And the reason here is that the Brazilian immigration is thinking, all right, this person, they don't want to do a digital nomad temporary stay in Brazil. They're actually coming to stay forever, right? And of course, there is some prejudice in this mindset because they are never going to tell you that for sure. But what they have in the back of their minds is like that, listen, if anyone from Pakistan would be given an opportunity to live in Brazil, guess what? They would live in Brazil. That's the mindset. So if you are applying for the digital nomad, I think your circumstances should be such that the Brazilian immigration is going to understand that, yes, you're just coming to stay for 1 year or 2 years and return to your country. Okay, and if on the other hand you are applying for the tourist visa, you should have a profile that's amenable to a tourist visa, right? Like, I mean, if you never traveled abroad and Brazil is going to be the first place that you're going to ever travel internationally, guess what? The Brazilian immigration is going to look at your application and is going to think, you know what? This guy, he's not coming here for tourism. He's coming here to live in Brazil. And therefore, I'm going to deny the visa application. Okay, so this is the mindset. What you are applying for, it should make sense given your specifics. So, just to give you a little bit more colors, like what would be a very a good candidate to a tourist visa in Pakistan, right? Like, I mean, I think, from the, Brazilian embassy perspective, would be someone extremely wealthy, someone who doesn't need to live in Brazil, someone who the Brazilian immigration could tell, you know what, I can tell this person is wealthy. They don't need to come and live in Brazil. They're just going to come to Brazil. They're going to spend maybe a couple of months spending money in the country, and then they are going to go back to their country. Now, if they look at the candidate and they can clearly see that the candidate is like pulling money to travel to Brazil, and they never, travel internationally or just travel a few times, the Brazilian immigration officer is going to be able to tell that this person is basically just preparing themselves to move and live in Brazil, which is not the purpose of the visitor visa, and it's not the purpose of the Brazil Digital Nomad Visa as well. All right, let's see what else we have over here. I don't see anything on our chat window, so I'm going to talk about a consultation I had this morning, and this was a consultation, and this happens every single week. And I do share for any of you who ever consider buying property in Brazil, to do so with eyes open. This person had a consultation with us, I think it was a couple of years ago, and she went out there and without our service bought a tract of land, right? She bought a tract of land, and she bought a tract of land which is rural without having the residency in Brazil. So now she paid the full price. Now the seller has all her money, and she was not able to get the deed of sale, and she's not going to be able to get the registration as well. And if she had hired us for the support, guess what? She will not be in the situation. Now she's going to try to secure the residency in Brazil in order to potentially qualify for, being the legal owner of the rural land. And, the idea is that during this meantime, there is a substantial legal risk because she paid the price. If the sellers, die in the meantime, if the sellers divorce in the meantime, this thing becomes a potential never-ending trouble. Okay, so just sharing, that's a consultation I had this morning, and I wanted to share with you just as a heads up that if you're buying properties in Brazil, you need to do that with eyes open, and you should have an attorney on your side, right? It doesn't need to be our firm. If you hire us, of course, we're going to be happy to assist, but it should be first a licensed attorney in Brazil, and second, it should be someone who understands the specifics of foreign citizens buying property. Another client, like they bought, rural land in Rio de Janeiro, did not have the necessary residency. That was the first mistake. And the second mistake, they had like a purchase agreement that was completely favorable to the seller and not to them, right? So now they are, like almost all the way in terms of payment, and there are still so many issues with the documentation of this property that it just sounds like a long shot. Okay, and the reasoning here is that people say, well, I don't want to spend thousands of dollars with an attorney if I don't need so, right? If I don't need to do so, and then they get in those kinds of situation from which most of the time you cannot recover, right? Like you cannot go back in time and fix what was done incorrectly in the first place. All right, so let's see what else we have. We have a single starman. I'm married to a Brazilian. We are thinking to retire there in the south. What are the details I need to get paperwork needed, possible permanent visa. Starman, there is a bunch of things. Like for sure, I cannot cover every single thing here in our live stream. I can potentially talk about a couple of points, but most of the serious immigration firms in Brazil, they are gonna want to work on a project to help you with the planning, right? And when you just try to wing it by yourself, that's when disaster occurs, just like I was saying. But like to share some of the most common roadblocks that we see for someone in your position. The first one is gonna be lack of recording of the marriage in Brazil. Okay, so for someone who's married to a Brazilian, the stepstone for the marriage residency is going to be a Brazilian marriage certificate, and it doesn't mean you're going to need to marry again in Brazil. It just means that your marriage, if this marriage occurred abroad, it needs to be properly recorded in Brazil, and there are many steps for doing so. This is one of the roadblocks we see very often. And the second one is not exactly a roadblock, but is something that for some reason people don't think about it, which is kind of surprising to me, is about the taxation effects of residency in Brazil. So when you marry to a Brazilian and you apply for residency in Brazil, the residency triggers automatically tax residency, meaning that now you're gonna need to file your taxes in the US and yes, pay Uncle Sam. And then you're also gonna need to file your taxes in Brazil, and yes, you're gonna need to pay Brazil taxes on your income from the United States. All right, you're gonna need to pay taxes. There are some approaches to reduce the double taxation. So there is a reciprocity in terms of providing credits for federal taxes you pay in the U.S. to be applied towards your tax liability in Brazil. Is not always like 100% applicable, the credits, but there are approaches to minimize the tax hit. So I would say recording the Brazilian marriage the foreign marriage in Brazil is one of them. Thinking about the taxation is a second point. Okay, and there are probably, I don't know, 10 points. Maybe just one more here. Is the FBI background check. You must have an apostilled FBI background check, and most people, they're gonna face a tough management of the process, because once they get the FBI background check, this thing is gonna be good for just 90 days. So you are in the US, you move into Brazil, you need to have these documents, you need to schedule the appointment, you need to have other stuff, which I haven't told you about. And typically when you are at the point of applying, guess what? Your FBI background check is no longer valid, right? So I would say third item is gonna be the timing of this whole thing. We use a project management tool called Monday.com, and through this tool, we try to make the timeline challenge of such residencies a little bit better. Not perfect. We never say we are perfect, even though when you see our reviews, people are very positive about our services. But just like anything else in immigration, is not always like exact science, right? Like there is a lot of exceptions sometimes in terms of the authorities that are working with us on your process. Sometimes it's like a document that is less than ideal, but that's what we do. We try to get a situation and make it as good as possible for our clients' goals. Mustafa, what about that 28 to 30,000 business investment visa for Brazil? Mustafa, that's one that we don't handle for sure. because of many issues, right? As you may think, as you may imagine, right? Like to try to buy a business remotely, and it's basically you're trying to basically buy a way into Brazil, right? So the problem is nowadays, if the business doesn't work, down the line you're gonna lose the residency. Okay, so if you're thinking about buying a business just for the purpose of getting like just you getting inside of Brazil, it may make sense, even though we don't handle here at the firm for obvious reasons, right? Like we don't want to do things that are long shot stuff. But the reality is the chances of you buying a business that is going to be active down the line, meeting all the employment generation requirements that come along with this visa, is just such a long shot. Okay, and we basically don't hand over here. The amounts for the business investment visa are going to be 500,000 reais. That's the standard. It's roughly $100,000. Okay, and then there is a reduced amount which is for startups, which is very difficult to meet this standard of startup because in Brazil the startup concept involves like really innovative type of business, and this one is going to be 150,000 reais, which is more or less $50,000, not mentioning all the other related costs you would have for that. All right, Mustafa. Aaron, if a digital nomad is abroad when their application gets approved and printed in the Gazette, can they enter the country to go to the Polícia Federal meeting even if their application is no longer in process? Aaron, yes, it is because basically you have an approved residency in the pipeline, right? Like you're showing to the Brazilian Federal Police that guess what? You have a residency, it was approved. So yes, you are entering the country to attend the appointment with the Brazilian Federal Police. Now, two details we need to tell you along with this first piece. The second one is that to enter Brazil, like from the United States perspective, or most countries in which you need a visa to travel to Brazil, the air company, they have zero knowledge about whatever you're saying, and they are not going to give any weight to any papers that you're going to present from the Brazilian immigration. So for a U.S. airline, what you're going to need to show it's an e-visa. Okay, it should be the e-visa, or it could be like an old traditional visa, like the 10-year visas that were actually printed on your passport. That's what the airline is going to try to understand. If you just show your Brazilian paperwork, the airline is going to say, this is meaningless to me, and you're not going to board the airplane. All right, so for the to board the airplane, you need either a visa or an e-visa, and valid, of course. It cannot be expired. Okay, and then once you arrive in Brazil, that's going to change, because then they are not going to be looking at the visa, at the visitor visa, particularly if you had already used all the available days for your immigration year. And in this case, the Brazilian immigration, you will actually review the paperwork that you are presenting. They're going to say, all right, like, so he has a residency approved, and now he just needs to attend the Polícia Federal appointment, right? And that's the second piece. Typically, when you're dealing with border control in Brazil, most of those folks, and I think you can clearly tell, they are typically young, they are typically outsourced, and they are typically not well paid. So you're dealing with people who have no clue at all, right? And I'm not saying that in a rude manner, I'm just stating a reality. They have zero clue about Brazilian immigration. They're just looking at a system, And if you present some paperwork, this paperwork, guess what, will also be meaningless to them. And the next step, which is typically what happens, they are going to call a supervisor, who in turn is going to be someone who has a better understanding of Brazilian immigration, and most of the time will understand what's going on, right? The problem is that I said most of the time, so sometimes, guess what, you're going to get into a type of limbo situation in which, the supervisor also doesn't understand what you're saying, they don't understand the paperwork, and this could, create tough situations at the border. So what we do for our clients, we typically provide like a letter of representation, kind of explaining like in lay language what's going on. And in addition to this letter from our firm, we also help you get, like proof of the approval or proof of the application, and help the Brazilian immigration at the border control to understand why you should be allowed entry in Brazil. All right, let's see what else we have over here. Aaron, for a business startup, construction software innovation, how many foreigners can apply together for the company? What is the investment requirement per investor? Aaron, so if this is really seen as a, as a startup with innovative, right? Like innovative topic, which is going to be adjudicated by the Brazilian immigration, the amount should be 150,000 reais, roughly. That would be actually $30,000, right? Like I think I misspoke. Like yes, it should be 150 divided by 5. It should be about $30,000, not 50. So just correcting what I said before, is not 50, it should be about $30,000 plus all the expenses you would have. But this amount is per is per foreign citizen. All right. If you have Brazilians participating, that's not a problem. Brazil is going to look at the capital requirement from the foreign citizens' perspective. So let's say if there are two Brazilians and then you are participating jointly, Brazil is going to look at the capital and is going to say, well, the foreign citizen should be, investing the 150,000 reais. This money should come from abroad. Is going to be recorded by the Brazilian Central Bank. Is going to be recorded at the company that's being formed, and most of the time, excuse me. Most of the time, this type of registration on the entity is going to be aggravating to the Brazilian partners, right? For reasons that go beyond what we're discussing over here. All right, let's see what else. All right, we have James Rochas. James Rochas, boa tarde, amigo. For Digital Nomad Renewal, I applied on June 22nd and it still says in tramite. How long it usually takes to change? James, nowadays it's taking like a month and a half for them to take a first peek at your application. So if you applied on June the 22nd, you should expect, like something to happen by the beginning of August. Every now and then, like when the Brazilian immigration has some change in procedures, we're gonna see like a change in like review time. But typically, like the faster we see, it's gonna be a month, and the latest we see is typically gonna be 2 months, and usually they try to keep it not earlier than a month and not later than a couple months. All right, so yeah, June 22nd, we are in July 22nd, it's been a month. I would say, James, like, expect something like by the first couple of weeks of August. All right, so heads up, or asking you for a favor. If you are here with us and if you are enjoying our live stream, please do us a favor and go and like our live stream. By liking our live stream, of course, you help our business and you also help other people just like you find this content. So, yes, please go and click on like. If you haven't subscribed already, go and subscribe. Whenever you subscribe, guess what? You're going to get a notice of future live streams so you can join whenever you need us. And you can also come to our YouTube page, and under the live section, we are adding future events. So if you enter right now on YouTube, you're going to see that we have our next live stream is scheduled for July the 29th. So if you click on notify me, you're not going to miss the opportunity of joining us. And guess what? You don't necessarily need to join, but you're going to have an option to join if you want to do so. So yes, you can go right now, go to the live tab, and then you can click on notify me, and then yes, you're going to be able to join us for the next live stream. Let's see what else. Let's take something from our backlog. And yes, this is related to the real estate investor visa. And, and there is a bunch of questions here. I'm not going to discuss all of them. I'm just going to probably discuss the main one, which is a real estate investor visa. It's never done. It's never just applied after you buy the property. The Brazil real estate investor visa, it is built prior to your beginning of the journey to find the real estate, because when you are applying for the Brazil real estate investor visa, everything that you do from the moment when you pick the property to the moment when you send the money to the moment when you close on the property, every single step is going to impact on whether or not you're going to secure the investor visa, right? So this is like the most basic mistake, and it's very amusing. It's very, I can never wrap my head around people who are moving to another country. They're spending like 1 million reais, which is like, at least $200,000, and they're still too cheap to secure an attorney specializing in the investor visa to walk them through the requirements. So every week, believe it or not, every week someone is going to knock on our door and is going to say, well, I bought the properties. Now I need you to help me file for the real estate investor visa. And not surprisingly, guess what? They bought the wrong property. They bought a property that does not qualify, or maybe they bought the right property but sent money in the incorrect way. And again, not surprisingly, most people who show up only after the purchase will not qualify for the real estate investor visa, right? So this is another heads up for you guys. And again, there are other firms operating in this space. My recommendation is that you make sure you hiring a reputable firm, and that whatever firm you're hiring is not a regular firm. Regular firms, they don't work with foreign citizens. You got to work with a firm that specializes in foreign citizens, because they know how it works in reality, not just in theory. All right, Aaron, when hiring a home cleaner, how does one avoid employment liabilities? Is there a concept of independent contractor, or is he only hired a business versus hired an employee? So, Aaron, and this goes in line with what I typically share about União Estável, right, and other challenges in Brazil, other traps, if you will, for Brazilians, for foreign citizens in Brazil. Employment, it does not matter what you do. The person can always file an employment claim against you, right? So if you're hiring, right, like very common nowadays, there are companies specializing in cleaning services. Even if you hire the company and that person is coming like every single week, like let's say if the company they work for goes bankrupt, they could very easily file a lawsuit for labor claims against you, even though you hired the company, you have the receipt, you have the contract, you're paying into a company. Guess what? The Brazilian labor court is not gonna care, okay? Because there was an ongoing relationship between that cleaning lady and you as the service taker. And of course, if the company that employs the lady, the housekeeper, is still around, then your defense is, oh, come on, like the company is out there, go chase the company and not myself. Now, if the company goes under, yes, you're gonna be the next one in line, okay? Now, for housekeepers, the only strategy that I think it is solid enough to share, okay, because pretty much everything else doesn't work, is when you can assess that the housekeeper was not coming to your place more than twice a week. Okay, so if you're paying a housekeeper to come twice a week, typically, right, and I will say typically because it's never guaranteed. I mean, they could file a labor claim no matter what. But typically, if you're just using like the services twice a week, most labor courts or most labor judges are not gonna found you as an employer of the cleaning lady. Now, guess what? If you have, cleaning 3 times a week, then they say, you know what, this thing like is stable enough to create a labor relationship, and therefore the cleaning lady would have a right for all types of benefits you can possibly think, including but not limited to 30 days of paid vacation a year, the Christmas bonus, which is basically an additional yearly salary, among many other things. All right, so yes, housekeepers, they do represent a big risk of labor claims, and from your perspective, the best you can do is to limit the cleaning to twice a week, because twice a week, in many decisions, judges are going to say, well, it doesn't create enough a nexus between the housekeeper and the service taker to find as an employment relationship. But once you have it 3 times a week, magically, yes, there is such a nexus, and yes, you could be held accountable for every single benefit that you're not paying from the get-go. Yes, welcome to Brazil. All right, let's see if we have anything else. We have room for one more topic, for one more participation, and then we're gonna conclude our live stream today. And if you're here with us, do me a favor, click on the like button, subscribe if you haven't done so, and remember, if you want to participate in next week's live stream, you just need to come to YouTube. Under the live tab, you're gonna click on notify me, and then you're gonna be able to participate in our next week's live stream. All right, so nothing else from the chat, so I'm gonna just discuss another topic here, which is, let's pick something that's not immigration, and it's not like real estate, something else, maybe not tax as well. Let me see which one we can tackle. Yes, união estável is a recurring topic, right? Like união estável is when you are, living, uh, when you have a relationship with a Brazilian, and over time you would create in Brazil a type of common law marriage, right? Like meaning that even if you haven't married on paper, even if you have not entered into a civil union, just by the reality of the facts, you're gonna enter into a união estável, okay? And unfortunately, nowadays, there are no minimum requirements, meaning that the união estável or stable union or common law marriage could be formed no matter what your circumstances are. Okay, so if you've been with someone for a certain period of time, you are presenting yourselves as a couple to society. I think that's the main that's the main way that I see on how to explain what's going to trigger a união estável. But as of today, there is no requirement that you're living under the same roof, no such requirement. And there is no such requirement such as living together for a minimum period of time. All right, so I've seen claims for união estável for relationships of less than a year, and it's not uncommon. Not say it is super common, but I would say it's not uncommon for união estável claims to be filed even when the partners they live in different households. All right, so as you can see, very low threshold for a claim for união estável. All right, so that was the last topic for today. I want to say thank you for all of you who participated in our live stream, and remember, we're gonna be here together again next Wednesday, and wishing you a blessed rest of your day.